Good morning. hmm If I had to, if you asked me for what was the most relevant lesson or learning that I could pay attention to, that would help me with on my spiritual journey, and in particular, the culmination of a certain part of the journey. The part of the journey I'm talking about is the becoming whole, letting go of separation, letting go of division, and becoming whole. Whole in your acceptance that we're all a reflection of the infinite, the all-encompassing moment, the moment of existence. So this culmination, which for me was a culmination of years of sitting, years of reading, years of listening, years of doing. I talk about doing, recognizing that we're human beings, not human doings. When I'm talking about doing, I'm talking about doing my practice. And my practice essentially boils down to meditation, sitting, which is a term I like better than meditation, because like enlightenment and many other words that attempt to talk about this process of awakening become misunderstood. And I think sitting in the true Zazen tradition, sitting and being, learning about the nature of silence, learning that silence is not simply the absence of sound, learning how to deal with the monkey mind, the chatter, how to recognize that this chatter can be never defeated, but relegated to a realm where it belongs, the realm of for entertainment purposes only. So this mind can be, this monkey mind, this incessant, non-stop chatter, can most simply be overcome by, number one, relegating it to its proper realm, entertainment purposes only, and number two, learning to accept it as part of how silence finds you. It's more about appreciating being in the state of silence, rather than the intellectual concept of what silence means, quieting your mind. Settle for taming it, I suggest. If you can indeed shut it off, more power to you. But I've learned to be at peace with my monkey mind. And this acceptance can help soften, weaken, and eventually discard this egoic being, this being that identifies with the use of the monkey mind. The monkey mind is such a big part of the ego. This ego that insists on exceptionality, accepts and stresses individuality. And being a very individualistic being, there's nothing wrong with this individualization until you see that it's no longer useful. As everything that we're given at birth, all the gifts that we have, some remain useful, some help develop, nurture, support this egoic, separate self. And over time, they're never overcome. It's not about defeating. They serve their purpose until they no longer serve their purpose. Such is life, isn't it? We, this individuated we, serve our purpose until we understand a greater underlying, enveloping, all-encompassing state of being. I wrongly spent 30 years trying to conquer my mind, with clarity being my ultimate goal. My natural state, as I was able to understand it, comprehend it, was anything but my understanding of clarity. Now I've grown to the point when I experience clarity as a state, a brief, fleeting state, appreciated, but not held on to out of desperation. Just as bliss is an occasional visitor, I think the time and place for total bliss, total clarity, non-stop bliss and clarity is a state that I'll experience once I leave the body behind. And if all goes well, I may have no need to confine myself to this physical body ever again, unless for the first time I so choose, in the hopes of, in the possibility of as offering solace, guidance to the rest of the sentient beings, all the while minimizing the import of any role I might have in this play, predicated on the understanding that all will awaken when the time and place is correct. So the whole point is that if you can, along someone's journey, if you can offer a role model, if you can offer encouragement, support, and most importantly, if you can offer your being as a role model for heralding that what awaits each and every one of us. So we talk about what was important to reach the state where conscious inquiry begins, the dedication to no longer live in an egoic, defined world of division and separation, but to instead embrace the commonality, the ordinariness of living in the state that not only was the intended state, but in truth, the hidden state, the state that you forgot to remember. One of the challenges that you're going to have to deal with at some point is paradox. And paradox, a big paradox, is the paradox of within perfection lies imperfection. This is the recognition of non-duality. It's not two, perfection, imperfection. One imperfection on one hand to be escaped, to dwell in perfection. Instead, as in the yin and the yang, the masculine and the feminine, the night and the day, the love and the life, come to be experienced as a sphere of commonality, a sphere of totality, a sphere of sameness. So this paradox is a good place. Paradoxes are really helpful on the way to experiencing non-duality. And I say experience because it's only through this experience that any reconciliation of diametrically, previously considered diametrically opposing points of view are indeed part of each other, and ultimately, as is everything else, part of the whole. So, koans, Renzai Zen, the tradition I was in, utilized koans, and I was giving a koan many years ago from my Roshi, and had occasion to go in a little room with him in his full regalia of his office, of his heritage, of his lineage, and offer my solution to the private, personal koan that was individually assigned to me, with the Roshi's vision of understanding what would be most relevant which would be the one I needed to wrestle with. And I always looked at koans as a problem to be solved. And much of life, especially from the masculine point of view, the yang point of view, life was a puzzle to be solved. And as long as I was in this mindset, which in honesty was the whole time that I spent with my Roshi, I maybe went 3 or 4 times. I was presumptuous enough to go 3 or 4 times in front of him and share my solution, only to be told to go back and keep doing what I've been doing. And along with this understanding of acceptance of apparent paradox that ultimately leads to the reality of non-duality, through this exercise, I looked at this maybe as a puzzle too, except that I never really honestly spent a lot of time. I was so accepting of duality. There's me and there's you. It seemed self-evident, doesn't it? That I really didn't question dualistic view until I came in the process, the awakening process itself, that I lived in the paradox, previously viewed as a paradox, when I truly understood non-dualism, completeness, inclusion. And this was done. I didn't certainly solve anything. This gift was given to me in my experience. Totally a gift. And this gift led to, for me, a solid day, at least 24 hours of laughing until I cried, and then cried until I laughed. Laughing jags and crying jags. 24 hours of this. I was worn out, let me tell you. The whole process was closer to 2 days, but this particular part, it was in the early stages, somewhere after being gifted with the views of previous incarnations, only for me to understand that sometimes I was a stable hand, sometimes I was a farmer, sometimes I might have a position of more import. A lot of times spent as a court gesture. But the point was this, is that how ordinary and how beautiful this ordinariness truly is. So there's a gift of viewing of reincarnations. Then this gift of understanding the paradox of opposites, that they are indeed one contained within the other, which led to my big aha moment, my big belly laugh, that I was finally able to entertain, to understand, to live, to be non-duality. That opposites, that the paradox of opposites was part of the Maya, of the illusion. And paradox is the beginning of questioning. Previous to that, it's simple acceptance. Me and you, that's two. There's this natural inclination towards duality. Then the aha moment and the crying and laughing jag that lasted another 24 hours. So by then, brief glimpses of what had become more common experience for me, brief glimpses of clarity, brief glimpses of bliss, more than glimpse, brief envelopments in clarity and and bliss, beautiful bliss. And then a period of probably serving the purpose of tapering down, a very deep meditative state that slowly evolved into noticing for the first time the chair I was sitting in, the body that I was encapsulated, enclosed in, the living room, the space around me, which expanded to the neighbors and the town and the country and the part of the world and then the part of the universe. This coming down, I guess, from a high, coming back to the body, and then sitting with a smile on my face. And I have to share with you that when I reached this state, my body was calling. I hadn't used the restroom in all this time, and it's something I needed to do. And what was beautiful to me in the process of evacuating, it turned out to be a metaphor for letting go. I came to understand, and that I spent weeks and months and years reflecting on these beautiful 2 days. I still remember May 1st, late May 1st to early May 3rd. Extended, and I celebrate, I make an anniversary, and I celebrate these 3 days, 2.5 days every year. So it was one of the things that came to me on this reflection of those 2.5 days was, first and foremost, beyond the realm of the senses. Extraordinary to discover ordinariness, my own ordinariness, the ordinariness of each and every one of us, and the beauty of being ordinary. The contentment, the peace, the lack of striving, the acceptance for what the world brings your way. So something that I took away from this could have been used. Maybe I could have done better on my koans. Maybe I would be better prepared to present Roshi with something that he could accept. But interesting, like many things, The usefulness of the koan for me had long since passed. I missed the opportunity to understand that it wasn't a puzzle to be solved as a mathematical problem. I mentioned earlier the masculine, the young view of resolving problems. I gave it away. Solving problems. We were problem solvers. My other half would tell me something and I would take it in the spirit of, well, it's a problem to be solved. But I gave away the punchline. It's not about solving. It's about resolving. And the difference between these two things, another apparent paradox, but the difference on one level is that the pressure to solve gives way to the ability to accept. So I'll say that again. Searching for a solution, a conundrum, something that would cause me to wrinkle my brow, looking for a solution, only to breathe in and deeply, deeply, deeply exhale, and all the worry, the concern left my body, left my mind. To understand that resolution only made possible by surrender, most importantly, surrendering to the truth, and most importantly, learning to live. Learning to live with this. That's what resolution is. When you can put something to rest, it doesn't mean necessarily that you completed. You didn't complete the task. Instead, you understood on the deepest level that it's not by necessity a task. Imagine the peace that comes to your mind, and through your mind, your whole being, the peace that comes with the understanding that you're not a solution seeker. This is not the be-all and end-all of your purpose. You resolve, you create a resolution of acceptance. Only by doing this does your mind start to have the elasticity necessary for it to wrap your head around the resolution of the paradox, the great paradox, the duality, the apparent duality. When you can say, during my experience, my particular duality that I dealt with was one that was deep. Destiny, preordained and destiny, so on one side, free will on the other. So I actually turned to destiny, to preordination, and looked it squarely in the face and said, yes, I understand, I accept that everything is about destiny, everything is preordained. And then I turned almost immediately and looked. I remember physically moving my body. I don't know if my hand was up like this, but looking, free will, free choice. Yes, I understand and I accept with every fiber of my being. So here I had reconciled, resolved, paradox, my personal paradox. So I'm spending this time sharing with you both how I like to include how I experienced it, and the caveat is that it has probably, ultimately, very little, if any, connection of similarity to what lies in store for you along your road. You'll need to find your own words, just as you find your own self, the self that leads you to the ultimate understanding of the universality of this self, the inclusiveness of this self. Surrender to the process. The whole process, if you look at it, it's all about surrender. Surrender duality. Surrender the ego. Surrender what comes after the surrender of the ego. For some, for me, was surrender a more subtle and ultimately more challenging spiritual ego, where you start to see that what you've been through somehow makes you unique and different, separates and divides again. This is a subtle state that needs profound honesty, profound reflection, to be ultimately dismissed as the counterproductivity it truly is. And beyond this surrender of the spiritual ego, when you begin to embrace the ordinary and see the beauty, the peace, the bliss, the silence, the clarity that this simple act brings home. Within this is all that there is. There is no more.